Grace to you and peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. Welcome to another Wednesday night session of Bible study at the Olive Grove Baptist Church in Norfolk, Virginia, located at 1034 Albert Avenue. We are happy to receive those of you who have gathered, as well as those who will participate in a scattered manner to our conversation as we continue looking in the Bible for what it is God wants us to be and to become. Won't you go with us now in prayer? Eternal God, we are grateful to you for the blessings of this day and for the privilege by which we call ourselves your servants. We thank you for the time and distance, for the circumstances over which you've brought us and the things that you've seen us through. We thank you for the gift of your word that contains all that we need to clear up the mysteries and the misunderstandings regarding what it is you are calling us to be and to be like. Breathe on us so that our eyes might be opened, our ears and our understanding, so that the things that when they say, you know what Daddy always used to say, I say, yep, I know what Daddy always used to say. And or on the other hand, well, what Big Mama said was, and they have these sayings that are catchy and memorable. And they use these sayings to illustrate different ideas or different possibilities or different circumstances. Do you remember any of your Reverend Waller's sayings?
I do. My dad, in fact, that's the last thing that I remember before he went to glory. He said to me, he said, I'm not out the woods, so I want you to keep your chin up. And he would have always said, regardless of what's going on, he said, you're not out the woods yet, but keep your chin up.
All right. What did it mean?
It meant that I learned, I didn't understand at that time, but life has taught me when you're not out the woods, it meant that I was still in a dark place. Life was happening. And he always would say, keep your chin up. It's always stay encouraged and keep the faith. That's what I learned.
I see. That reminds me of an old friend of mine, now gone from us, who had a saying, and I'd ask him, Dr. Brown, how you doing today? He said, well, I'm kicking, but not high. That was his comeback. What did your mama say, Mary White?
No, it was my daddy.
Your daddy.
So you stop using them $25 words, because if don't nobody understand what you're saying, you might as well shut up.
Oh, my. So you've been using $12 words ever since. I see. Mr. Bond, do you have a saying from your childhood?
It was so long ago. Now, I was trying to actually reflect back on that. And during good times, my father would slap his hands together and say, you can't beat that with a stick. That was his saying. He used to like to say that.
Yeah. I think the benefit of such sayings is much like the benefit of the teachings of Jesus. The teachings of Jesus in many instances come to us in the form of parables. And as you know, a parable is a story that seeks to reveal some sacred secret, some divine truth. It's told in a manner that makes the story memorable, and so we keep it and we remember, because the story is a lasting one and can be recited. And Jesus calls what we are calling parables, Jesus calls these parables the mysteries of the kingdom. And the mysteries of the kingdom are intended to reveal for us these sacred secrets and to give us handles that we can hang on to that enable us to call up these stories from time to time to illustrate the kinds of things that Jesus knew were useful for us and memorable for us. And so he comes, he uses these parables. We're going to be looking at the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 13. And in particular, we're going to look at the verses between 24 and 43, where Jesus talks about the kingdom becoming. He's already, earlier in the 13th chapter, told some stories about what the kingdom of God is like, what the kingdom of heaven is like. So sometimes there are similes, a thing that says that a thing is like or as another thing, and sometimes there are metaphors where he draws comparisons between things in an effort to illustrate the desirable thing and the undesirable thing, the behavior that's appropriate and beneficial, and the behavior that's inappropriate and not beneficial, and maybe even destructive. So when he tells a parable about the sower and the soil early in this chapter, the idea is that we should be able to connect with the picture that he paints about how things go down as a sower might scatter seed. In that time, it was not unusual for someone who was sowing seeds to take a handful of seeds from a sack that he might have made from his apron or a piece of his garment, and take a handful and fling the seed, and wherever the seed lands, it has a good chance of growing. But whether it thrives or doesn't thrive, fails to thrive, depends on the condition of the soil where it lands. And so you look at this story and you come away knowing that it's not as much a story about the sower as it is a story about the soil and the condition of the soil. And so we come to some conclusions about ourselves when we consider how the seed of the gospel has taken root or not in our lives or in our communities, how the seed of the gospel that, having been flung out by the great sower, has really thrived or failed to thrive. Did it thrive or did it languish? Did it shoot up quickly and burn out, or did it take root and become richer and richer? There is in Virginia now a weed that is green and it stands tall. It's called nutsedge. It's not grass, but it'll invade your grass. It'll invade your lawn. You go to bed at night and it's not there, and you wake up the next morning and it's the tallest thing in your lawn. And it looks like grass, but it's not grass. It imitates grass, and it's green. It's not the same color as the rest of your grass. It's not, the leaves are not the same shape or the same form. So it's an imitation of real grass, but it's not real grass. It's a weed. It doesn't really belong. It's undesirable. You don't want it, but it just grows. It doesn't care that you don't want it. If you pull it, you don't make it better. You make it worse, because the only way really to get rid of it is a certain kind of poison, and you might have to do that more than 1 year in order to get at it, because it grows from little tubers under the ground, and it runs, and so it rises out of the ground every now and then, and sometimes in bunches all over the place, usually in your flower bed somewhere where you don't really want it to grow, and so there it is, and to remove it is perilous, because you're going to end up making more of them come. So you pull up this thing, and I heard from a certain landscaper that there are, each time you pull it, there are 5 pods that are released in the ground, and instead of making it clearing your lawn or your flower bed, you make it worse. You make more of them come. And when Jesus tells this parable about a sower, he tells us also about the stories about the soil and the seed. And when when the seed lands on good soil, it will not only thrive and grow, but when it lands on bad soil or thorny ground, it competes with other weeds and grass itself or whatever else is growing in that place, until we come to a place where the soil in which the seed is sown is rich enough to cause the grass or the seed to thrive and to be strong and good looking and to become what it is the one who sows the seed or scatters the seed wants it to become. Jesus has given to us the privilege of spreading the seed of the gospel everywhere we go, and it happens that sometimes the soil where we spread the gospel is ready. It's rich. It's right for the seeds, and the environment is good. But sometimes, like most of us, our lives are shaped. They are affected by our environment. So a lot depends on what's going on around us, so that sometimes we sow the seed of the gospel of the kingdom in soil that's angry, that's anxious, that's afraid, that's been ridden hard and packed down, that's gone fallow, that's just not prepared to hear the seed that is the gospel. And when that happens, of course, we have some choices to make. Would you turn on that fan, Al? Sometimes we have some choices to make. We can either give up on the soil, or we can nurture the soil and cause to bring the soil along, because you get good soil by nurturing it, by preparing it. And so it is with the good news. When we are not successful at planting the seed of the good news in a particular place, don't get so upset with the seed, or don't get upset with the soil, but nurture it. And sometimes I had a conversation today with Stacy Robinson, a friend of mine, a member of our church, who and he was talking about how difficult it is to deal with people who have been released from prison because of their inability to cope with the way things have changed in the time they were away, or because of their inability to overcome their limitations that they see in themselves, or the inability to contend with people who have gotten ahead of them when they were stuck in time, people who have learned things that they don't know. When Stacy was released from prison after 25 years or 24 years and 6 months, he came out and he needed to find a job, and he needed to look on a computer to find a job. But when he went to prison, computers were not like they are now, and his ability to operate a computer was not what it is today. And so he had to feel his way through around the computer to learn how to get it done. And he overcame what he overcame and didn't go back to prison, and vowed that he never would. It doesn't happen that way for a lot of people. A lot of people have been through so much that it's difficult for them to overcome their past, and they see no hope. And so it's hard to nurture such soil to the point where it becomes good. Thank God we don't have to make the gospel work. What we have to do is let the gospel work. So we keep on telling that same old story. You know, you've heard me say this before. Sunday after Sunday, I get up in front of you and I tell you the same story over and over again. And this Sunday I'm going to tell it from facing this direction, and next Sunday I'm going to tell it facing this direction, but it's going to be the same story. And when somebody else is doing it, like Gladys told y'all the same story that I've told you last Sunday or the Sunday before, and the same story I'm going to tell you next Sunday. But it's the word that works. It's not the gardener. It's not us who. It's not our assignment. It's our assignment is to spread the gospel and let it do what it do. And so we go around doing what he has commissioned us to do. Even so, there is always, for one reason or another, opposition to the kingdom come. So Jesus talks about the presence of a kingdom. He's talking about the kingdom becoming, but the kingdom has come, and the kingdom is still becoming. And while the kingdom is becoming, our assignment does not change, nor does opposition to our assignment change. So what we're trying to do in the name of Jesus, Satan's trying to undo in his own name. And so we continue to be prepared for opposition in the kingdom. We're still prepared for that wild grass, that nutsedge that invades our fields, that weed that attacks the plants that we want to nourish. So he where we plant the seeds of the gospel, he plants falsehoods and plants that really won't produce good results, or confusion, or doubt, or fear, or anything else that might frustrate the growth, the becoming of the kingdom. And such is the story that he tells in the parable between verses 24 and 43. But before we go there, I saw you with your microphone in your hand a second ago.
I did, and I was thinking about the plant and that soil, and you can look at a plant, and sometimes you see the brown tips in the plant, and that tells you all about the soil, what's going on with this plant. And my daughter had brought a plant over to my house, and she said, "Mom, I'm doing everything, but the plant is just dying." And she brought a whole bunch of stuff to take care of the plant. But I looked at it and I said, it's not the plant, it's the soil. And so I told her, just leave it with me, I'll take care of it, And I nurtured the soil, and the plant just began to thrive. And it's all about the soil.
Yeah.
So we can come and we can plant wrong stuff in the soil. Not wrong seeds in the soil. Yeah. And get a bad product from it.
The seed, because the seed is the seed. It's good. It's the soil. You notice that the peace lily in the middle, before just as you came in today, it looks like it's been overwatered. I didn't stop to touch it or anything, but the color is fading, and often when that's the case, it's that the plant has had too much water, which is kind of a surprise because there haven't been many people around much lately to overwater the plant, and yet that's what it looks like. But you get to choose whether to give up on the plant and walk away from it, or to stay with the plant and nurse it and nurture it, because that's what will make it better. And so if we're talking about a community, we're talking about people, we're talking about the people to whom God has sent us and assigned us. We can walk by them and pray that they'll get better in the sweet by and by, or we can take time to nurture them and help them to come along so that the gospel can take root and do what the gospel can do. And we believe that the gospel has the power to transform, and we believe it in part based on what the gospel has done in us and what it has done for us and what it has done to us. So we're going to look at we're going to look at verses 24 through 30 first, Mary. Jesus told them another parable. He had already told them the parable about the sower and the seed and the soil. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while everyone was sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. Then the wheat sprouted and formed heads. Then the weeds also appeared. The owner's servants came to him and said, "Sir, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Where then did the weeds come from?" An enemy did this, he replied. The servants asked him, "You want us to go out and pull them up?" "No," he answered, "because while you're pulling the weeds, you may uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. At that time, I will tell the harvesters, let both first collect the weeds and tie them in bundles and to be burned. Then gather the wheat and bring it into my barn." And so what do you think he illustrates with this story? Nobody's going to answer me but you and maybe Mary. So it'll be our conversation tonight.
Yes.
Okay. Unless somebody writes in a question or an answer. My sister always watches, but she doesn't talk enough. I wish she was here. Then I couldn't shut her up.
I think with this, he's saying, with the world and the Christians, with the believers and the non-believers, we're going to grow together. We're going to exist together until that day when he comes back. And then at that moment, it's going to be the separation.
Mary?
I also think it's telling us that we shouldn't be so sure of who we think belongs to God or not. We should just do what God said do and let the Spirit take care of the rest.
Yes, ma'am.
And also, I'm reminded of when I used to be in the country. And,
What are you laughing at, Mary?
sir?
Mary laughing at you. Used to be in the country.
Oh. When we used to have to do the garden, and if we went out in like the potatoes, especially the potatoes, we'd have to go and pull the weeds out. But if you weren't mindful, we would pull the potatoes out because the weeds and stuff would get, the roots up under the bottom would get tangled together. And we were pulling up the crop. And so that's what came to my mind, because you can actually pull up the wrong thing. What's my word? Unroot the wrong, up.
It isn't real. It's fake. It's counterfeit. It has no redeeming value. You can't do anything with it. It doesn't really. It looks like grass, but its intention is to interfere with the growth of edible food or useful fruit. Yes, Mary?
I would even go so far to say if we dwell too much on what we think we're looking at, we might be the wheat or the tare.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
might respond in some way out of Christ,
Right.
and then we become the tare instead of the wheat.
Yeah. It's what Gladys said about the brown tips on the plant. We may have our own share of brown tips on ourselves, so that where we have had too much or too little of something that would cause us to flourish and take away our ability to do damage. And so the enemy of the gospel comes in among the believers and invades our fellowship with intentions to tear down what God is trying to build up. And so if we sleep on him, then that's when he comes in and does his work. When we stop paying attention to the fact that we have to pray with our eyes open, as it were. We have to worship with our eyes open, to live with our eyes open. We have to watch and fight and pray. And if nobody's watching, then that's when it's easy for the interloper to come in, and is that a $25 word? To come in, to come in and do us harm, to undo the thing that God's trying.
It up so it can multiply under the ground. So that spray that you spray on it will kill it from the top and go down without releasing all those.
Go ahead, country. Go ahead, country.
I'm from the city. I can't help you with no plants. But I remember Paul telling us to be careful because the wolves were coming.
Yeah.
And he had left all those babes there. But I think if we stay with the word and not with our feelings, then we might be able to get through. And I believe you need to confront false doctrine. But even that's got to be done in a graceful way.
Yeah, because there's no, the goal is to win lost, not to win the argument. So if all you're trying to do is win the argument, then you end up with seeing who can talk the loudest or the longest. But the truth works, and it's the truth that liberates. And when we learn the truth and say the truth, then the word has a chance to do its work. Yes, sir.
Well, fortunately, with people,
Weed, the wild part of us takes over, and the corruptible becomes more and more corrupt. But there's a way beyond that. So there are this parable is about fake Christians, fake grass. It's about the thing that looks real, but it's not. And Jesus warns us to watch out for the real thing, and to allow him to take charge of what happens with the real thing and the fake thing, and he'll take care of it in his own time. And so he gives us this parable so that we have our eyes open and we're paying attention to what's going on around us, rather than ignoring the onslaught of chaos, the return of chaos, or the tricks of the enemy, or the presence of the enemy, or the strength of the enemy, and his determination. He intends to steal and kill and destroy, and so we have to watch out. The next two verses 31 and 32, are a difference. He told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and planted in his field. Though it is the smallest of all seeds, yet when it grows, it is the largest of garden plants and becomes a tree, so that the birds come and perch in its branches. So here we have a word about what it takes to produce something that can be used. You can't really call the plant that comes from a mustard seed a tree we'd be more inclined to call it a bush than a tree. But though it comes from the tiniest, almost microscopic kind of seed, when I was a boy, people used to have these little mustard seed things that they'd wear around their necks. It was a little piece of plastic, and in the middle of the plastic is clear plastic with a mustard seed in there. You remember that? The mustard seed was a tiny little thing, and it was barely something you could see, and it was to remind the observer of the power of faith. If you have faith the size of a grain of a mustard seed, you'll be able to speak to the mountains, and the mountains would be moved. But he uses this same mustard seed to talk about the way a thing can develop. Now, he didn't give us the meaning of this parable as much as he gave us explanations about the other parables, and so we are left to our imaginations to figure out what he in our abilities to discern what he had in mind when he tells this parable. What do you think, Reverend?
I was reading what the Message was saying, and the Message doesn't use it, a mustard seed. It says in another story, God's kingdom is like a pine nut that a farmer plants. It is quite small as seeds go, but in the course of years it grows into a huge pine tree, and eagles build nests in it. And it did remind me of a pine. If we see a pine cone, in the pine cone, in those little crivets is the seed. And we used to go and get them and wait till the sun opened them up. And it was a little seed, and it's amazing to see how tall a pine tree would grow from just that little teeny small seed. And I've always equated it to your faith. All you needed was a little, just small as a mustard seed. For it.
Yeah, in the Old Testament, Jesus wouldn't let Peterson use that illustration because it says something different than I think Jesus says. He changes from a mustard seed and the kind of little bush that can grow from a mustard seed, and he changes it to a 100-foot tall pine tree, and he doesn't have just sparrows and robins in the tree. He has eagles in the tree, and but in the Old Testament more than the New Testament, the tree was a symbol of a world power, a symbol of a dynasty. If you look at ancient hieroglyphics or cave paintings or the kinds of paintings in the walls in Egyptian tombs, you see trees, and these trees are symbolic of nations or of empires. And in this illustration, it seems that that fact allows us to see the kingdom of heaven as the reign of God, as the empire of God, and it enables us to see the kingdom as a worldwide power, a complex organization, a nation with many branches. We describe the local churches in the language of the branches of Zion. We talk about this branch of Zion and that branch of Zion, and how the universal church is scattered in a number of branches. And so you said it last Sunday, I am the vine and you are the branches, and my Father is the husbandman or the gardener who is responsible for that. So Jesus seems to talk here in a metaphorical way about the rapid growth and the magnitude of the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God, and with branches that allow people or churches or birds to find places where we can roost or nest or nurture. Now, some people disagree with that and say that they make Satan the image of the bird that nests in the tree and the danger that nests in the tree. But I don't see that. What I see rather is the safety,
Sanctuary.
Huh?
Sanctuary.
Yeah. The things that give us a place to rest, and it begins with something very small, and he gives us that, the measure of faith that we're given, and as we nurture the measure that he gives us, we grow and find our places in the branches of Zion, and we nest and nurture and roost and hide there. And so he gives us this second parable or this is the third one, I think, where he gives us less information. Let's see about the next ones, 33 to 43.
The next parable or all the way to the end?
Huh?
Just the next parable or all the way to?
All to the verse 43.
Okay.
He told them still another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed into about 60 pounds of flour until it worked all through the dough. Jesus spoke all these things to the crowd in parables. He did not say anything to them without using a parable. And so was fulfilled what was spoken through the prophet. I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter things hidden since the creation of the world. Then he left the crowd and went into the house. His disciples came to him and said, explain to us the parable of the weeds in the field. He answered, the one who sowed the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed stands for the people of the kingdom. The weeds are the people of the evil one. And the enemy who sows them is the devil. The harvest is at the end of the age, and the harvesters are the angels. As the weeds are pulled up and burned in fire, so it will be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will weed out his kingdom, everything that causes sin and all who do evil. They will throw them into the blazing furnace where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their faces, in the kingdom of their Father. Whosoever has ears, let them hear. Have you ever had unleavened bread? You don't know?
Didn't it like crackers or pita bread or the stuff that's not risen?
You have?
Crackers and pita bread and
yeah.
stuff like that, right?
Well, crackers? I guess it's possible to have some crackers that are unleavened, but it must be also possible to have crackers that have yeast. They don't rise, do they?
Yeah.
Crackers. The places where I'm sure I've had unleavened bread are in worship with Jewish people, and of course the unleavened bread is reminiscent of their Passover time, and so they even annually repeat the Passover celebration, and they use unleavened bread as one of the components of their meals. So you make bread, country? You know how to make bread. It was the most wonderful time when my mother decided she was going to make bread. fresh bread, make some rolls, and it was pretty fascinating to watch her knead and knead and knead and knead and take the bread and put it back together again and knead and knead and knead, and then to put it in a big ball and a bowl, and then to cover it and allow the yeast or the baking powder allow the baking powder to do what the baking powder did, and it caused the bread to rise. So where she put in a big ball that didn't always rise above the rim of the kingdom, the quarters of the kingdom, so that the thing that is supposed to happen in the church does happen. It is ours to make the distinction, as Mary said, between false doctrine and the doctrine of Jesus Christ. It is ours to deal with the hypocrisy and falsehoods, false teachings, and our responsibility is to share the gospel in that way. Yes, ma'am.
And also, I'm seeing that we work and we wait because we want everything to be so instantaneously right now. But if we do the work, like when bread is made and the yeast is put in it, you have to kettle it and you have to work. But you put that work in ahead of time, and then you have to wait for it to rise. So even in whatever ministry it might be, we put the work in, we put the word in, and then we wait for the yeast to do the job. We wait for the word to make it.
It seems contradictory to what Jesus says in the other parables, because if we're supposed to embrace, to hear and heed sound doctrine, here is this symbol of evil that Jesus uses in this case to illustrate something that, and we have to make it work for us. And so we have the yeast being a good thing, the unleavened bread being less than bread. So we find ourselves confronted with this opportunity to deal with what sounds like false doctrine because of the contradictions between what Jesus says in other places and what Jesus uses to illustrate the growth of the gospel in this verse. Yes, ma'am.
Y'all are making me think, because I do remember seeing Mama fix bread. I didn't learn myself, but I know what that's like. And she used to call it proofing. So that, and she actually, after the first rise, punched that bread down so it could rise a second time. So when we look at all this trouble we think we know the word, but do we really? Until we've been punched down a little bit and can rise a second time. Get up again.
I'll rise again. Yes, ma'am. I like that, Mary.
See, but when the second time, the first time it was put in a big bowl.
Right.
But the second time, and it rose up.
Right.
But the second time, it was pinched off and rolled into little bits and made little rows. And each individual roll rose by itself. So it speaks to us.
That's that second rising.
That's that second rising.
Oh, my.
Yeah. So when it's punched, and you're going to get separated, but that means you're going to grow. And the word is going to be spread, and more people will be reached because versus confined in this one big bunch.
Or fed.
Fed.
Yeah. So that after that second rising, the bread has a chance to do what bread is intended to do, and that is to nurture. In the same way that that we have the seed scattered, flung about, or in the same way that we have the mustard seed planted, or the same way that he uses these illustrations in the telling of parables to identify opposition to the kingdom and opposition in the kingdom, because the opposition to the kingdom often comes from within the kingdom. And so some seed that we plant produce good fruit, and some seed, it starts out great and look like it's going to be wonderful, but it turns out to be nothing. And some seed falls between the cracks, and you're surprised to see that even though it fell between the cracks, somehow it managed to grow. Sometimes not in the place where you wanted it to grow, but it grows not where always where you want it to grow, but always where the sower wants the seed to grow, and he might cause it to thrive in a place that it seems so unlikely that it would thrive. But I say that's the sower just showing off. He just showing, I can do whatever I want to do, and he does. And so Satan opposes the work of God, opposes what goes on in the vineyard, and attempts by any means necessary to frustrate the work of God by introducing false doctrine, or by frustrating growth with weeds and ideas that don't go anywhere and don't do anything. So it looks like because the weeds are thriving the way they are, that the kingdom isn't turning out the way he wants it to. But he says, you just let those grow, and when the time is right, I'll take care of them and separate the weeds and the fruit on my own. Well, that's our time. It is 8:01. I went 1 minute over. I'm sorry for that. And next week we're going to return to the stories in the Gospel of Matthew, and we'll see what more the Lord has to say to us. Thank you for being a part of our conversation tonight. I pray that you'll be able to join us really soon in real life. We meet this way every Wednesday, and then again on Sundays at 11 o'clock in the morning, where you can find us either on Facebook or on YouTube or Instagram. And we are delighted to have you whenever we do. So come see us sometime. God bless you and good night.